Is the opportunity for rent-to-rent still, is it still a good opportunity in 2023? Rent-to-rent has changed a lot of people's life. The 200 people where tourists 5 rooms, you rent it out room by room in a different contract. The second one is obviously our standard rent-to-rent service accommodation and short let, which obviously at the moment in 2022/2023.
And I was like thinking, okay, well, I want to grow my business rather than just managing the bookings.
Yes, rent-to-rent has changed a lot of people's life in the UK and even around the world. And for me, when I started my estate agency, one of our largest clients was, at that point, I didn't understand rent-to-rent as a letting agency and an estate agency. And I think one of the biggest problems right now in the UK is that, people trying to secure units with letting agents and they don't understand the process. But at that point, I got to adapt to one of the largest, people at that time. I think they had just over 100 units, mainly focusing on business travellers in Farnborough. And so I understood at that point what they were doing, and I've seen throughout my journey from 2018 till now, 5 years later, I'm very lucky to say we've worked with, God knows, probably 200 people in the rent-to-rent market, scaling their business, getting them bookings, and be able to work with 2,500 property. Sounds pretty cool, right? But look, many people think, is it still too late to get into rent-to-rent strategy? Because obviously if you look on social media, look on Facebook, look on YouTube, all you see a lot of people talking about rent-to-rent strategy and the lowest way or the easiest way to get into property market, right? So in this video, I want to talk about the trend. I really want to talk about this year, and I want to make sure that if you're investing in rent-to-rent strategies, I want to make sure that you understand every single model so that you pick the right one for you. However, with all the changes that's happened, I've seen it all through 2018 till now. Is the opportunity for rent-to-rent still, is it still a good opportunity in 2023? And look, many people starting, because I get to work with a lot of people who's just secured a unit and they come and work with us, and they firstly think it's way, or if they've been mentored and stuff, that or if they look content online, they make it look so easy. And some of the posts I've seen where people go, put it on Airbnb and booking.com, and and don't get me wrong, yes, it is a strategy, it is the way to do it. But then also I feel like when somebody gets a unit, what you do in a location, i.e. if you're in a location in Italy where tourists is amazing, and yes, you've got a season month, you are going to smash it through. But then you come down to quieter months, yes, it's all good that you say, that it's off season stuff, but your property is still losing money, right, at those specific months. So so understanding that is quite important right now. And so let's go through what is rent-to-rent first of all. And rent-to-rent, it's generally, but you probably have watched a lot of video around it, but for me it's quite simple. Rent-to-rent is you get a property, agree a property with a landlord or a letting agency with the right contract. That's the biggest thing. I've actually got one of my biggest clients right now. I mean, I'll chuck in a little bit on it. Let me run that video quickly because you will get to see it.
And I was like thinking, okay, well, I want to grow my business rather than just managing the bookings.
So here you go. A client, I'm trying to, at the moment we're trying to grow their brand, which we have scaled their business. I think they're sitting around 30 properties right now. But you've heard from him how, council, which is obviously your local authority, can sometimes raise concern, and as a result of that there's certain way to deal with it. And my client's currently stressed about some properties that he has in his books, and eventually he's saying, Piers, actually I've just landed I think like a 6 months booking on that property. So so you can see how it can sometimes, if you don't understand the right legals, the right opportunities, you might, it could be a problem, right? So opportunity in terms of rent-to-rent is not just making money. Opportunity is where you've got to make sure the legals are right. You make sure that your operational's right. So then when things like this does happen, you are fully covered. It's a shame that you might have to give up the property, but you can go down the line and add more properties in different investment areas because you're fully aware. But so that is rent-to-rent for me in general. But again, the pros and cons, I've done a separate video on it. But talk about rent-to-rent in this video, I don't just want to talk about short-term rental. Firstly, rent-to-rent started where Airbnb wasn't there and people used to rent a property from a landlord and then let it out in a certain agreement. Obviously in the UK, you go to the council and get a certain license to run it as a HMO, right? So house of multiple occupants. So 5 rooms, you let it out room by room in a different contract. Obviously legally you've got to set up the property in a certain way, fire regulation and all that kind of stuff. But that's one way people started rent-to-rent business. What's quite unique about it right now is I get a lot of people who have started on rent-to-rent HMO are now seeing people come in and start doing service accommodation. And you know, it's like a buzzword that used to happen back in 2012, 13, 14 regarding HMO, rent-to-rent HMO. You know, people guaranteed a rent to a landlord, X amount with bigger properties, and let it out as rent-to-rent HMO. So that's one thing that a lot of people started their rent-to-rent journey. If I look 2 ways, I've seen people who's got bigger property gone from rent-to-rent HMO to service accommodation, a short let, didn't work out, didn't, you know, understood, but then also have a backup plan as a rent-to-rent HMO if it's a bigger property, right? Obviously, if you're getting a 1-bed apartment, you won't be able to do that. So that's first way to do rent-to-rent strategy. The second one is obviously our standard rent-to-rent service accommodation and short let, which obviously at the moment in 2022/2023 has been one of the biggest buzzword all over the world. Obviously people call it Airbnb arbitrage, short-term rental, management company for short lets, or service accommodation. It's effectively the same thing, right? Obviously I do talk about different guest behaviors and where you want to fit them or how you want to create a model that works for you. But yeah, you know, the first thing about service accommodation, rent-to-rent service accommodation for me is it's been amazing to see a lot of people get into this journey. I've seen the goods and the bads and the ugly by, you know, consulting clients from 2018 till date, and you know, people who's reached out to me in DMs who obviously I've not been able to work with because they couldn't pay me to work with them, but then they've closed the business. I've saved over 10 business in 2022 from shutting down and using branding strategy, changing their strategy, getting them bookings, getting their property filled. As a result of that, they're still operating and even scale today, right? So that's another way to get to rent-to-rent. And the last one is, yeah, you can do rent-to-rent single let. There's certain ways to do it. Obviously, I'm not a massive fan of, because in terms of I've seen people doing it in a slightly lease option perspective. I've seen people do it in care homes. So you can, obviously it's a slightly different commercial method, but you can do that. So interestingly, you see, how do you bridge the gap? I mean, one of the biggest thing people ask is, how do you actually do rent-to-rent, right? So understanding rent-to-rent in 2023. I think for service accommodation business, there's 3 things I've looked at. 1, property investing strategy. So rent-to-rent as in property investing. The second thing within that business is the hospitality business. You're obviously taking somebody else's property. Not only you're protecting their property, running it as a business, but you need to understand from an end user who's paid you that money to obviously make your business work, they are your guests. They need to make sure they have a great hospitality experience. And last but not the least, passionate about, I talk about this in every single video, it is a marketer's business. And if you want to do amazingly well in your rent-to-rent, short lets and service accommodation business this year, you need to understand you can't just put it on Airbnb and booking.com. You're not going to maximize potential. Yes, summer months, now we're getting into the highest peak seasons, coming months, you're going to smash it through. But then when it goes to quieter months, you're going to sit down with messy calendars, 3 nights booked within a month, and then you've got to start chasing your calendar. A lot of trends happen around those time when people start dropping their price because they need to break even. So guys, look, it's quite interesting how you can start looking at different strategies in different ways. Now this year, I wanted to make sure I do something different in every single video for you to invest time and actually watch my video. I want to make sure there's one call to action I want to put in this video for you to do. I think if you can kindly write down 5 major points that you can sell within your service as a short-term let provider. Obviously you're watching this video because you want to do rent-to-rent service accommodation. 5 major benefits that you can provide to a landlord or a letting agency and actually use that on your follow-up email, right? One of the biggest thing, obviously all my short-term renter mastermind people know, is we've got a process of follow-up and close within a phone call. That follow-up process is where your email goes, and you need to make sure there's 5 things within that email that really make sure that, you know, when the agent reads it or the landlord reads it, they're like, oh my God, these are the things that I've always wanted within my property or hands-free let, right? So guys, if you could do that, if you want to share that in the comments, please do. The more people share, the more obviously people are going to learn. And yeah, look forward to catching up with you guys in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure you connect with me on all the social media. I'm connecting with a lot of individual operators all around the world, and the goal for this year is to make sure that short-term rental is done correctly and make sure that all the properties are being filled.